I stopped playing video games because I just didn't have time for them anymore, but I miss them so much. And I don't really have room on my phone to play this one car racing game I used to play. It's called Real Racing 3, I think. Oh, that thing was so much fun. For a game you can play on your phone, it was amazing. Anyway, general advice for, we'll call this guy's story Evil Woods into Shadow, just to give it something a little bit different. So the general advice for any kind of store, on the grammar at least, is the common errors. Go for stuff like synonyms and homonyms. Your is super common. The way to tell the difference between your and your, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E and Y-O-U-R, say the word aloud and say the contraction aloud. Is it you-are or your? If you say it aloud, you will know every time, almost every time. Sometimes it's tricky. And there, occasionally I will still make a there and there mistake, which is humiliating. And commas. If you speak the lines, the dialogue aloud, it will tell you either where to put a comma or a period. So when in doubt, err on the side of shorter sentences. Will be a little bit easier. Figure out your characters right from the start. Then they must stay in character. One way to do this is do detailed character sketches. You can use the first draft as just more of an idea. Don't think, I've written books before too, and you'll realize when you write it and get to the end of it and realize, oh, all right, this wasn't really a book. This was just kind of a collection of stories. But it's all a learning experience. So your first draft is just kind of an idea sketch, an idea collection. That's fine. Go back and do character sketches for every character. Then rewrite the story fresh, keeping in character. And everyone who has a part in the story, even if it's just background soldiers, then you can just say, well, they're acting like soldiers in this kingdom's army. They have to act a certain way. And you might want to compare them to armies of the time period that you have in mind. More on that. So everyone who has a part in the story has a background character sketch. If this story has a wounded soldier who's kind of an ancillary character, you got to know what their history is, what their relationship with the king was, what their fighting skills are, just basic stuff. Are they married? Where do they live? So you want to write a brief history. This story is about kind of a kingdom, Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Ring type of thing. So you want to write a brief history of the kingdom, the geography, the climate. What is your modern day location that we should envision and that you are keeping in mind as you write the story? It makes things a lot easier if you simply base your fantasy land on a real place. Just take Ireland, just take a map of Ireland and use that as your template. It makes things much, much easier because people make cartography mistakes with geomorphology all the time. Like someone will draw a map and they'll have the geomorphology doesn't follow gravity or something. They'll have rivers going in places that rivers couldn't go because, different geomorphology follows physics. And so just don't try to make it up for yourself. Just use an example. If you just want turn a geographic area upside down and no one's going to know the difference. And honestly, no one's going to know the difference. No one's going to recognize Ireland anyway, or whatever you want to write it on. Write a brief history of your location. Base your set on a real location, the flora, the fauna, the weather, the architecture. Makes it all easier if it's based on a time and space that is real. What skills do your people have? How did they learn them? You can't have something like a bad swordsman turns into a good swordsman in a month. That takes years, if not decades. And in this story in particular, he had kind of a common element I've read in fantasy before. The guy starts off as a swordsman. He's no good at swords. And then he hints that he wants to learn the bow instead. And his trainer says, we'll start you on the quarterstaff instead of that. That's a common trope, but he didn't go anywhere with it. He never learned the sword, and he never learned the bow, and he never learned the quarterstaff because the story kind of took off running. Most important thing is tell a simple story well. Dialogue is critical. They must stay in character. Keep your story as simple as possible, but no simpler. If anything, err on the side of too simple, at least for the first couple drafts. You're not Agatha Christie. Save all the double crosses for your more experienced self a decade from now. Every act in the story has to be internally consistent with the character's motivation and beliefs. If the story is set in a time period, the language, dress, technology must fit. You can't have any modern phrases or any modern, not words. Well, yeah, definitely can't have any modern words in the dialogue, but even word usage and syntax, sentence structure. If you want to make it sound, I guess this is set in a fantasy world. Or that's another weird thing is, what is it called when something's out of time? Achronistic or something. It means it's out of time. It's misplaced in time for the setting. Like if you have a real world location, then it has to follow the rules of the real world location. England in 1050. I think you're better off making a fantasy world. And when you make a fantasy world, you can't have something like a Bible in it, because that doesn't belong to the universe of the fantasy world. In this specific case, he made this, I think it was based on a real world. He's got the Bible in it, so okay, it's the real world. And it's just a throwaway line mentioning the Bible. You can get rid of that really easily. But then it does things that are not in the real world. So Fantasyland is much easier. Again, base it on a real geography to make it fit. Stay in the story genre. If it's comedy, then be consistent. And comedy is different from a light-hearted story. And also, you want to figure out the rating of the story. Skip graphic sex scenes and graphic levels of violence. Believe it or not, you can have a great sword and sorcery story without a lot of graphic violence. It's funny, I just picked Lord of the Rings to have background images because I didn't want to show the guy's story because he's pretty secretive about it, as well he should be. It's funny, though, I do have the Lord of the Rings ring made out of titanium instead of gold that somebody gave me. It's kind of cool. Okay, I'm going to go into details about this guy's in specific story, so you might want to dip out. Page 3, this is about some of the language syntax. He uses the phrase enough stress, and stress is just too modern a term. You got to be comfortable with rephrasing concepts like using troubles or, heavy heart or a furrowed brow or weight on his shoulders. Alternative ways of saying stress that sound like it's medieval, even though it's not. This should be set in a fantasy world, but you think of it as a fantasy world of like 1,000 years ago. England makes things easier. Okay, I'm not correcting the grammar so much, but like I said, commas and yours are the things I noticed. There's probably a dozen yours misplaced, and probably 24 lacking commas. Dark Forest. Oh, kings don't smirk. There's a scene where, one scene in the book where the guy smirks, and that's a pet peeve of mine, hearing that word. Smirking is something low-powered people do. Kings and princes and soldiers don't smirk. I mean, they might do it in real life, but they don't do it in stories because stories have to be simple characters. Kings don't smirk. It's not an alpha move. It's something gammas do. Use a phrase emotionally distant. That's a modern term. Then you use a phrase mad from boredom. That didn't make sense into the internal consistency of the story. You might just say, am I mad? He saw something unbelievable. And am I mad? Or what is this madness? Something like that. Something to sound more medieval. You get a scene where he breaks into a dungeon and the lock falls and hits him on the head. That is a little story for this point of the story. I mean, a little silly for this point of the story. The story up to this point hasn't been comedy. It's been kind of very dark and serious and evil. There's a bunch of wizards and wizards, but it's like the darkest part of Mordor, and you've got this kind of pratfall comedy. I honestly think you should get rid of a lot of the darkness and focus on a lighter-hearted story. But so you can't have comedy that's inconsistent with the elements of the story. You can't have pratfall comedy. You can have lighthearted elements, but lightheartedness is not pratfall comedy, that kind of thing. You want to shorten that scene of him opening the door into the dungeon. Okay, this character is 17 years old, so he's naive, but he frees a wizard. Kind of a simple scene. It didn't, like, 17-year-olds are too old to be that naive to free a wizard, a tricky wizard. He should know. I mean, are wizards commonplace in his universe? Does he know how tricky wizards and witches are? that's why you got to write character sketches and motivation and like history of this kingdom. If wizards and witches are common, then people know not to trust them. They know to be careful of this kind of thing, because it's like, even what do we have, the Hans Christian Andersen type stories as in our world, so we know to be careful of cabins in the woods because of witches. Okay, there's some your mistakes on page 36. She says you're not innocent. You want to get some synonyms for creepy, maybe eldritch horror, growing apprehension, trepidation, something like that. Because you use creepy a little bit. I am your savior, remember? I think there's a comma mistake in there. That's on page 40. Then you have the sword. Someone stores their sword on the back, a back draw instead of a side draw. And I believe that's impossible to draw a sword from your back unless the holster is not tied at the bottom, which means the sword would be very, very loose. There's a guy who does sword stuff on YouTube, and he actually showed what happens if you holster a sword on the back. You can't actually draw it out because the sword won't leave the hole. Your arm's not long enough to act as a pivot. It doesn't bend in the right way. So you probably want to have that attached to his hip. Then some commas on page 41. Speak, comma, not. Then the demon's talking to the prince, and the demon says the prince doesn't get out much. That was a bit weird for the scene. It had comedic elements, but you're unsure, is the demon scary or not, or is it a comedy? And then later on, if we find out the story is very, very dark, so these comedic elements don't work at all. Page 51, don't get emotional. That language is too modern. Don't be rash. Or you want to replace don't get emotional with don't be rash, or think with a cool head. You want to make the language fit the scene, and the scene is like, it's supposed to make us feel of like 1,000 years ago in Europe or England or something. Pages 52 and 53, you've got torture. That's a bit much for the tone of the story. You don't see torture in stories for a reason. It's like rape. Nobody wants to see it. It's just very rare that you're going to see torture and struggle snuggles in any kind of book. It limits your audience, and a lot of your audience is going to read that and just dip out. I mean, there's a reason. Here's the thing. You want to keep all these other stories in mind, all these books you've read growing up, and what they do and how far they go, the parameters they set, the boundaries. You want to use those as guidelines to know what you can use. Okay, at page 54, you use the word physician, which feels to me like a modern word. I'm not sure on that. I might use the word healer instead. And then you're safe is, you are safe. Okay, you got the character on page 54 coughing up blood. That's usually going to be fatal, especially in the Middle Ages. I mean, if you've got a torso wound in the Middle Ages, a lung, you might survive a lung wound, actually. But a gastrointestinal wound, you wouldn't survive. Okay, he's coughing up blood, so I guess that's a lung wound. He might survive that, but here's the thing. You introduce this wounded soldier who we're starting to like. It's starting to grow on us. You don't want us to lead us to believe that a character will pull through and then kill him off. You want to be careful to realize that you're creating characters that your audience is starting to fall, in love with is too strong a word, but we're starting to feel for these characters. So you got to kill them off very, very carefully. You have to respect that your audience is starting to get emotionally attached to these characters. Then there's a phrase he says, not comfortable with the idea. That's an anachronism. It doesn't feel medieval. Page 60, your, contraction here, you're so good with a sword. Page 61, it seems to imply that they have sex in front of the other two soldiers. That is really weird. And then there's a scene where the bird is nesting in the fire because it's some kind of dragon or phoenix or something. So that's cool. It nests in the fire. I thought that was actually a very smart scene to have the dragon sleeping in the hot coals. But then, like a paragraph later, you have the bird fly back to the fire, but you never establish that he left the fire. Page 66, face reality. That's too modern, that modern usage. Time to build a pyre. Aren't they in a hurry? Oh, he builds a funeral pyre for their dead soldier, but it seems like, well, they're in a hurry to rescue someone. Actually, that kind of reminds me of the ending of Lord of the Rings, when they don't have time I think the first movie, they don't have time to build the funeral pyre, so they put the body on a raft and send him downstream, which actually works in the story, because I think the king later finds his dead son, Boromir and Faramir, or whatever the hell. Page 68, your contraction, it, comma, and. Commas, here's how you use commas. You say the line out loud. You put commas where you pause, or periods just start new sentences. Think of like Hemingway. I think he was a guy. I haven't read Hemingway in decades, but he used to do those short declarative sentences, and people had Hemingway writing contests and stuff. Say you are your out loud, and you'll be able to almost always tell the correct usage. Kill it, comma, but. Page 69, kingdom, comma, but. Prince is too quick to believe his dad is evil. You got this kind of stuff. You got to establish. Like, you had a paragraph of the wounded soldier, I don't know, telling the prince that his father is evil, and the prince just believes it. But there's no setup earlier in the story for that, and it also kind of makes the prince a little, not morally ambiguous, but lack of a moral core if he's willing to believe that his father is evil right off the bat. You might believe your father's a jerk or insensitive, but you're probably not going to believe he's evil unless that is set up and established in the story early on. Page 72, you use the word stress. Again, I think that feels too modern. Oh, and you get the prince running into danger several times, and it's like several repeated scenes. So you establish that the prince is naive early on, but the thing is, he runs into danger like 3 times in short succession. Even a 17-year-old is quickly going to learn not to run into danger, at least, look before he leaps a little bit. Because it literally happened like 3 times. He rescues a maiden in a dark forest. I mean, this is kind of similar to the Mirkwood Forest in the Two Towers book of Lord of the Rings, where the hobbits are older and they know. Oh wait, no shit. Wait, that was in the Hobbit, wasn't it? Anyway, he knows this character, Prince, knows the forest is dangerous. He's been warned about the forest his whole life. He sees a girl like drowning, and he jumps in to rescue her. And it's like, shouldn't that look like a little bit of a trap to him? I don't know. He's naive. He might fall for something once, but the wizard tricked him in the dungeon to release him, and then the maiden tricked him in the forest to rescue her from drowning. And then she sneaks him back to her cottage. He goes back to her cottage, and it's like, Hans Christian Andersen time there. So he gets fooled again. So it's like, after this, you'd think he'd start to be a little bit more cautious. Anyway, you got the scorpion spider, which reminds me of Lord of the Rings. Here's the thing. The tail has the spinnerets. Those are the things, the organs that produce the webs. The fangs are up front. So with a spider, it's the fangs up front, and then alongside their fangs, they have these 2 little like helper appendages that help them shovel up stuff to their face, I think. So that even in the Lord of the Rings, that movie scene where the spider, it's so stupid, had the stinger in its tail. It's nonsense. Spiders don't have stingers in their tails. That's what wasps and bees have. Those are for making webs. The dangerous part is up front. You don't have to. That was silly. And having a scorpion spider with it has webbing, so it means it has a spinneret, and then it has a scorpion tail above it, and then it has the fangs up front. It's like, no, it's either a scorpion or a spider. Just pick your battles. Spiders don't chew. They inject venom into their food, and the venom, I guess, tenderizes the meat a little bit, and then they suck the whole thing up. I think that's how spiders eat, but I don't think they just tear off pieces. That's like more of a praying mantis or something. You got the girl tied up, and the prince is moving slow. He should be moving fast. I mean, by this time in the story, he knows things are dangerous. He's been using a sword for a while now. He sees the girl tied up. He knows he's in danger. It would be natural just to untie her as quickly as possible. Page 78, I wrote down honestly. I don't know why I wrote down that. It should be honestly, comma. Page 79, you're dead, and it's the wrong you're. It should be the contraction, I guess. Oh, and then he says, any information would be helpful. That is too modern. Page 80, I'm guessing too modern. Split up, injured. Split up. He says they're split up, they're injured. He wants to split up, cover more ground, something like that. Except one soldier's injured. The prince, is inexperienced. And why is the 17-year-old giving tactical advice anyway? The girl who's a warrior or a soldier, and the wounded veteran have experience in strategy and tactics. You wouldn't have the 17-year-old naive guy giving advice on how to storm the castle. You got the two main characters' names. There's too much alliteration going on there. One is like Evelyn and Erwin or something. E and E. It's too hard for the reader to tell those names apart. In fact, that was a bitch about Lord of the Rings, is reading reading a lot of the language in Lord of the Rings made it difficult for readers. I mean, Tolkien was a genius, but there are things he could have made a little bit easier for the reader. So you may want to separate those names. The prince and the soldier, the wounded soldier's interaction, it's off. It's something wrong about it. It's like experienced soldiers demand a little bit more respect. And even 17-year-old princes who have been trained in the basics of, sword fighting and hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that, they know to treat a veteran with a little bit more respect and dignity, because it all depends. You got to establish this type of stuff. How spoiled is the kid? You got him, he's 17 and he's learning to use a sword. So if he's not very good at it, well, you learn to use a sword from as soon as you can walk. You learn to use a wooden training sword. So that kind of doesn't make sense. You might want to actually look into that, like when people start using swords, because kids learn to use bows and swords as soon as they literally can. I mean, your father might make you a toy bow or a wooden sword to practice on, because that kind of like muscle memory, that takes decades to learn. And so the kid is like shooting small game with a small bow, and then when he gets older, he builds his own bow, or gets a real weapon. The thing is, that kind of training is like, you probably start from 7 to 17. So by the time he was 17, he wouldn't be as good as he was when he was 25, but he would probably be very good by 17. So the interaction between a veteran soldier. A veteran soldier is not going to take a whole lot of shit, even from a prince. It would be like a lieutenant talking to a sergeant. Lieutenants know the sergeant has experience in the field, and so you're going to let the sergeant offer guidelines, because the sergeant has more experience. And whoever has the most tactical experience is the person who you want to get advice from. And I think most people know that. You see a grizzled old veteran with scars, and you realize, well, he survived until he's 30, so he really knows what he's doing. Anyway, page 81, Ironheart's plan or the prince? Oh yeah, I'm not quite sure whose plan it was. The soldier is called Ironheart, or the prince's. Page 82, you have a garbage tunnel in a castle? I don't know about castles. I don't think castles have garbage tunnels. The only tunnels I'm familiar with in castles are I don't know what they call the bathrooms in castles, the heads or whatever, the ward closets or wardrooms or something, because they hung like furs because the methane gas would keep the moths from eating the fur. That's the only tunnel I'm aware of. I don't think they have garbage tunnels. The kitchen has a midden, and they might use a wheelbarrow to dump out the midden to keep it far away from the castle, because if you had a garbage tunnel in a castle, you just have rats, like nonstop, and rats are already a problem. So you're going to have to look up a little castle architecture. And again, you might want to draw a castle. Base it on a real castle, because I don't know the first thing about castles, and you probably don't either unless you're into this medieval type stuff. Page 85, what have they done? Oh, it's a bit obvious. You want to avoid trite, hackneyed, cliche, or overused phrases. He says, the bad guy's talking to the good guy, says, do you really think I was going? That's an overused phrase. I think you have the king falling twice, and that's like a continuity or a logical fault, where if you have the king fall once, you got to establish that he got up again before he fell again. Page 86, why didn't the demon just kill the prince in the beginning? Now, I know this sounds like harsh criticism, editing, or giving a little review on someone's work, but you can write, and the beginning of the story starts out very well. It's just the ending of the story gets very, very complicated, and on page 86 we start getting just super weird. So the demon grabs him, and the prince stabs him, and I guess I was confused. I thought that was going to end the story right there, so I was criticizing that it was too simple, but it turns out I was wrong. The story gets more complicated. Page 87, the whole page's dialogue is overused phrases, and then you're confused, comma. So he has a magical sword, but the demon says it's fake, but it's like Sting, it glows, but it also works to kill demons, but it's a fake sword, but it doesn't seem to act like a fake sword. Page 88, Wardenclyffe, comma, page 89, demon laughing. The demon laughing is overused. You have him laughing quite often. Enjoy the look of fear on your face. That's an overused phrase. Mothers love trapping the demon. Why does a demon think a human is attractive? They're demons. So the story's got comedic elements early on, and then it abandons them. I think you need to pick a genre. Page 90, the girl tells the prince to leave. Why would she tell the prince to leave? There's two people with swords fighting. You wouldn't tell your 50% of your army effectively to leave. You probably need his help. So she wouldn't tell him to leave. Why not just work together to kill the demon? Your contraction, stubborn. The demon can shoot blasts of magic. No, that is too much of a plot device. The demon has claws. Okay, here's the thing. When you have animals, this type of anthropomorphic creatures in fantasy, if an anthropomorphic creature like a demon has claws and teeth and a scaly tail, like just two-legged dragon, I want to see him use his claws and teeth and maybe fire breath. I don't want to see him use a sword, because then why does he have claws and teeth if he just uses a sword? You would just use a humanoid for that kind of thing. So you got him shooting magic. That's too much of a plot device. It can be too easily abused by the author. And this is where we start getting into like a little bit childish of having the demon be so powerful. It feels like he can do anything. And I mean, criticism sounds harsh, but it's easily fixed, because it's, like I said, it's in the end of the story. It's like the last page, 10 pages. Page 90 says, I may die, but that's a cliche phrase. Page 92, how did they kill the magic demon? You said the demon can't be killed by a mortal. Okay, so you're going to have to look up the logical continuity of the story. The demon is telling you elements of the story that, no human can kill me, but then they kill him. So that doesn't make sense. Page 94, the king isn't acting very regal. I guess it makes sense later in the story because you explain that he's adopted or something. Page 95, use the coughing a bit too much. The laughing and the coughing is overused. Page 96, you got the king rapidly age. That's a cliche. It reminds me of Beetlejuice or the Indiana Jones movie. Page 97, your contraction right. Page 98, whatever. That's an anachronism. It feels too modern. So the demons are able to kill soldiers easily, but the untrained prince and some girl can fight them. That violates the internal story logic. The prince tells the experienced lady to stay put. She's an experienced soldier. He's a 17-year-old who doesn't know how to use a sword. That doesn't make sense. Page 100, the dead king turns out to be a demon. There's way too much going on for a beginning writer, for a beginning story. I made the same mistake myself in my first story, my first book. I had way too much going on. And I made all these mistakes too. That's why I'm able to point them out. Too much going on for beginning writer. You foreshadowed that Evelyn was evil, but then that kind of got lost in the mess, the mosh, I mean. So the demon can create illusions. He is just way too powerful. He's got too much magic. It feels like Deus Ex Machina. The level of magic in Lord of the Rings and Terry Pratchett's Discworld is what you want. Forget the twists and turns, the magic, the overpowered demon. Oh, you might want to read some Piers Anthony Xanth books if you want to do a light-hearted book. My point is that with Lord of the Rings and Terry Pratchett's book is magic is actually kept to a minimum. It's like you think, oh, sword and sorcery, magic and dragons. Even in The Hobbit, the dragon was kept to a minimum. It was more of an intellectual dragon. So Piers Anthony, Terry Pratchett, J.R.R. Tolkien, Terry Goodkind, I believe that's his name, writes sword and sorcery fantasy. Very cool stuff. They keep the magic to a minimum because it can do anything. It's really hard to write fantasy. And the best written fantasy is stuff that has the least fantastic elements in it. Think of Lord of the Rings. Page 102, you got Merlin, you got multi-dimensions, you got the Bible. So this is like time, place, and manner, anachronisms. There's too much going on. Simplify the story. Think of like Alan Dean Foster. I think he wrote Trapped on Prism, like a crystal. That was an excellent story about a guy kind of up on himself who learned to be humble and learn. That's just a great story, Alan Dean Foster. That's a good story of how to, I don't know, tell a complicated story as simply as possible. Page 103, you got the demon having sex with people. That is just beyond ridiculous. Use other stories as your guidelines. Yeah. Lord of the Rings wasn't complicated. It told a simple story very well. Figure out, oh, you know what? If you want to read, Richard Meyer actually writes dialogue better than most comic writers I've read. He wrote 2 books that I'm familiar with, or 3. Ironsights 1 that I have, and Jawbreakers 1 and 2. The dialogue in those 2 books is excellent. So use those stories as your guidelines, or really Lord of the Rings, Terry Pratchett, that kind of stuff. You want to figure out who your characters are first, because they must stay in character. 104, you had the girl get pregnant, but the king didn't know his queen was pregnant. Usually you can tell pretty early on. And then you get the demon has teleportation powers. No, that is way too powerful. You've given him every power. You got the Bible in the story, but it's not set, it doesn't feel like the story's set on Earth. And regardless, leave the Bible out of the story. You're losing half your audience when you bring up the religion, because people, you're either Christian or vaguely Christian. They just trust me, leave it out of the story. Page 105, your contraction. 106, nobody cares about womanizing. Okay, yeah, this is supposed to be set in the Middle Ages. You got a king womanizing. Nobody cares. The kings and queens are just marriages of convenience. They're just genetic mixing. Like, the queen gives the king a half dozen heirs, but on the side, the king is banging whoever he wants. That was women's role in society. So nobody cares about womanizing. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be Earth. Like I said, set it in a fantasy world. It makes things much easier. Page 107, you got the demon's whole dialogue on that page is too modern, and then the demon can fly. So, demon kills the bird with magic, but he can't kill people by shooting these magic fireballs. So this is just too much. Page 108, you got the demon laughing again. And then you got a stone castle burning. I'm not sure how a stone castle burns. That's why I say, when you write this stuff, do character sketches, set it in real locations, base it on real castles, get a picture of the castle, draw a little picture of the castle if you're going to do it yourself. Is a castle made of stone? What part of the castle is burning? If it's a stone castle, they're pretty, the interior stuff can burn, the thatch roofs can burn, but how did it catch on fire? Did someone have a trebuchet, a catapult, a Molotov cocktail, or what do they call it, Greek fire back then? You got to stay internally logic and consistent. Anyway, so I went through this, very kick-ass, like I said. Take this as, I know this isn't your first draft, but take it as a draft, write the character sketches, and then rewrite the thing, keeping them in character, and I think you've got a kick-ass story. All right, like, comment, subscribe, guys, if you made it to the end, and I will see you all next episode.